The smartwatch glowed blue in the darkness, casting shadows across Charlotte's sleeping face. I wasn't snooping, just checking the time, honest. 3:17 a.m., and my wife's wrist was buzzing with notifications she'd somehow managed to sleep through. Funny how selective hearing works, even in dreams. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Tonight, can't wait. Wear red. The message sat there like a neon sign in a funeral parlor. No name attached, just a phone number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped somewhere around my ankles as I stared at those 8 words that would change everything. Charlotte stirred beside me, her auburn hair spilling across the pillow like spilled wine. Even in sleep, she looked perfectly composed, the kind of woman who probably dreamed in PowerPoint presentations. We'd been married 6 years, and I still sometimes wondered how a washed-up journalist like me had landed someone who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. Now I was starting to understand. I slipped out of bed, bare feet silent on the hardwood floors of our perfectly renovated colonial. Everything about our house screamed success, from the exposed beams Charlotte had insisted on to the security cameras she'd had installed last month. For safety, she'd said, though our suburb was about as dangerous as a Disney movie. The kitchen granite felt cold against my palms as I leaned over the island, staring at nothing. Elliot Grayson, data analyst extraordinaire, reduced to checking his wife's messages like some paranoid teenager. My reflection in the window looked pathetic. Thinning brown hair, stubble, the kind of tired eyes that come from too many late nights, wondering why your wife works until midnight, 3 times a week. Wear red. Tonight was the company gala. Charlotte's big night, where Damien Wolfe, her golden boy CEO boss, would be handing out awards and glad-handing investors. She'd bought a red dress 2 weeks ago, something that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I'd thought it was for me. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with something besides my racing thoughts. Outside, Mrs. Pike was already walking her ancient poodle, probably cataloging which neighbors had their newspapers delivered and which ones were having Marshall problems based on bedroom light patterns. The woman was like a one-person surveillance state. "You're up early." Charlotte's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway wearing my old Columbia Journalism School t-shirt, looking effortlessly beautiful in that way that used to make my heart skip. Now it just made me feel hollow. "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true enough. "Big day today." She moved to the coffee maker, brushing against me as she reached for mugs. The contact felt electric and wrong at the same time. "Nervous about tonight?" "Should I be?" Something flickered across her face, too quick to catch, too obvious to miss. "It's just work stuff. You know how these things are." I knew exactly how these things were. Boring speeches, overpriced drinks, and a bunch of people in expensive suits pretending to care about quarterly projections. What I didn't know was who would be texting my wife about wearing red. "Damien giving his big presentation?" I asked, watching her face in the reflection of the microwave door. "Among other things." She sipped her coffee, staring out at Mrs. Pike's surveillance walk. "He's been working really hard on this. I bet he has." Charlotte turned, studying my face with those sharp green eyes that had first caught my attention at a press conference 6 years ago. She'd been the PR flack trying to spin some corporate disaster, and I'd been the reporter trying to get past the spin. Somewhere between her deflections and my questions, we'd found something real. Or I thought we had. "You seem off lately," she said. "Everything okay?" The question hung between us like smoke. I could ask about the text, could demand answers, make accusations, start the fight that would probably end our marriage. Instead, I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Just tired. Looking forward to seeing you knock them dead tonight." She relaxed, the tension flowing out of her shoulders. "In red?" especially in red. After she left for work, I sat in my home office staring at spreadsheets that might as well have been hieroglyphics. Data analysis was supposed to be objective, numbers don't lie, patterns don't deceive. But people? People were a different kind of math entirely. The house felt too quiet without Charlotte's presence. Even the security cameras seemed to be watching me with judgment. I'd installed them myself, back when I still believed we were protecting something worth saving. My phone buzzed. Sam Rodriguez, my one remaining friend from the newspaper days, now owner of the Iron Oak, the kind of bar where cops and construction workers drank alongside trust fund babies, slumming it for authenticity. Heard through the grapevine, tonight's the big night. You need backup? Sam always knew more than he let on. 20 years as a beat reporter, then 10 more as a cop before buying the bar. The man collected secrets like other people collected baseball cards. Just a corporate thing, I texted back. Right. And I just serve drinks. Call me if you need anything. The afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. I tried working, tried reading, tried pretending my world wasn't tilting off its axis. Charlotte came home at 4, earlier than usual, carrying shopping bags and wearing the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Picked up a few last-minute things, she said, heading upstairs. I heard the shower running, then the hairdryer, then the subtle sounds of someone getting ready to be beautiful for people who weren't her husband. When she finally came downstairs, the red dress hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just red. It was the kind of red that stopped traffic and started wars. The dress hugged every curve, fell to just the right length, and probably violated several laws of physics. She'd done something different with her hair, swept it up to show off the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. How do I look? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Like trouble, I said, which was truer than she knew. The hotel ballroom was everything I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, overpriced flowers, and enough hairspray to punch a hole in the ozone. Charlotte worked the room like a politician, air-kissing colleagues and laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny. I followed along like a well-trained spouse, shaking hands and making small talk about quarterly projections and market penetration. Damien Wolfe held court near the bar, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's magazine. Silver hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly salary, a tan that screamed expensive vacations, and the kind of smile that made investors reach for their checkbooks. I watched him watching Charlotte, the way his eyes followed her across the room, the slight smile when she laughed, the possessive tilt of his head when other men talked to her. It was like watching a nature documentary about predators stalking prey. "Elliot!" Damien's voice boomed across the conversation. "There's the man behind the woman. How are you holding up?" The phrasing was weird, but then everything about Damien Wolfe was slightly off-center. He had a way of making innocent comments sound loaded with meaning. "Surviving," I said, accepting his handshake. His grip was firm enough to prove something, not quite hard enough to be obvious about it. "Charlotte tells me you're in data analysis. Must be fascinating work." "Numbers don't lie," I said, looking directly at him. "Unlike people." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or recognition. "How philosophical. Charlotte, you didn't tell me your husband was a poet." She appeared at my elbow like magic, her hand finding mine with practiced ease. "Elliot's full of surprises." "I'm sure he is." Damien's smile never wavered, but there was something predatory about it now. "Well, I should probably get ready for my presentation. Charlotte, don't forget we need to go over those numbers afterward." "Of course." Her fingers tightened on mine. "Whatever you need." The words hit me like a slap. Whatever you need. Not whatever the company needs, or whatever the project requires. Whatever he needed. As Damien walked away, I noticed Charlotte's eyes following him, The same way his had followed her earlier. The same way married people weren't supposed to look at anyone except each other. The presentation was everything I'd expected, corporate buzzwords wrapped in PowerPoint slides, delivered with the kind of confidence that came from never having been wrong about anything important. Damien talked about synergy and paradigm shifts, while I watched my wife hanging on every word like he was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Charlotte clapped harder than anyone, her face glowing with pride that should have been reserved for family members or close friends, not bosses, never bosses. That's when Damien did something that changed everything. As he stepped down from the podium, he didn't head back to his table or seek out the investors who'd been trying to corner him all night. Instead, he walked straight to Charlotte, placed his hand on the small of her back, and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. The gesture was intimate, possessive, the kind of touch that said mine in a language everyone in the room could understand. Charlotte didn't pull away. The ballroom suddenly felt too small, too hot, too full of people pretending not to notice what was happening right in front of them. I could feel eyes on us. Colleagues, competitors, the kind of people who lived for gossip and scandal. Mrs. Henderson from accounting was whispering to her husband. The CFO was trying very hard to look anywhere else. Even the waitstaff seemed to sense the electricity in the air. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor loud enough to cut through the ambient conversation. Charlotte looked up, her face flushing as she realized what everyone had seen. Damien just smiled, his hand still resting on my wife's back, like he owned her. "Elliot," Charlotte said, her voice tight with warning. I walked over to them, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet that had fallen over our section of the room. Up close, Damien was even more insufferable. Cologne that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, cufflinks that caught the light just so, the kind of confidence that came from never having consequences for bad behavior. "Great presentation," I said, my voice carrying farther than it needed to in the hushed ballroom. "Thank you." His hand was still on Charlotte's back. "Your wife here has been instrumental in making tonight a success." "I'm sure she has." I looked directly at his hand. That seems like a very hands-on approach to management. The silence spread like ripples in a pond. Conversations died mid-sentence as people turned to watch our little drama unfold. Charlotte's face had gone pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. "Elliot," she whispered, "don't." But I was already past the point of don't. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of trust, 6 years of believing in something that apparently existed only in my imagination. The text message flashed in my mind. "Tonight. Can't wait. Wear red." "Is this appropriate?" I asked, loud enough for the tables around us to hear clearly. "This kind of mentorship?" Damien's smile faltered for the first time all evening. His hand dropped from Charlotte's back as he realized we had an audience. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. Is it appropriate for a married CEO to put his hands on a married employee in public? Because where I come from, we call that sexual harassment." The words hit the ballroom like a bomb. Conversations stopped entirely now. Phones appeared as people started recording. Charlotte looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "You're out of line," Damien said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you're the one who's out of line." That's when I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I stepped forward, close enough to smell his expensive cologne, close enough to see the calculation in his eyes. Then I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, not violently, not threateningly, but with enough pressure to make my point clear. "I think you owe my wife an apology," I said quietly, "and me, and everyone else who had to watch that little display." Security was already moving toward us, but I held my ground. Damien's face had gone red. his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice in spring. "Get your hands off me," he hissed. "Apologize first." The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. The entire ballroom was watching now, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. Damien's reputation, his carefully crafted image, was crumbling in real time. Finally, he spoke. "I apologize if my actions were misinterpreted. Not good enough." My grip tightened slightly. A real apology. To my wife, for putting her in an inappropriate situation. His jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "Charlotte, I apologize for any misunderstanding." I let go of his shoulder and stepped back. "Thank you. That wasn't so hard, was it?" Security reached us just as I turned away. But there was nothing for them to do. No violence, no threats, just a husband protecting his marriage in front of 300 witnesses. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, leaving behind a wife who couldn't meet my eyes, and a boss who'd just learned that some people still believed in consequences. The real fun was just getting started. The Iron Oak at midnight was exactly what I needed. Dim lighting, honest drinks, and the kind of clientele that minded their own business. Sam Rodriguez was working the bar himself, which meant he'd been expecting me. "Rough night?" he asked, sliding a whiskey across the scarred wood without being asked. You could say that. The liquor burned going down, but it was a clean burn. Honest. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know you didn't come here to discuss the weather." Sam had the kind of face that invited confessions, weathered, knowing, completely non-judgmental. 20 years of police work had taught him when to listen and when to ask questions. I told him about the text message, the Gala, the look on Charlotte's face when I'd confronted Damien. Sam listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling my glass or nodding at particularly relevant details. "So what's your plan?" he asked when I finished. "I don't have one yet." "Bullshit. You've got that look in your eyes, same one you used to get when you were chasing a story." Sam leaned against the bar, studying my face. "Question is whether you're chasing the truth or chasing revenge. Maybe both. Dangerous combination." The bar's door chimed, and I looked up to see Leah Morrison sliding onto the stool next to mine. Charlotte's best friend since college, the kind of woman who collected gossip like some people collected stamps. She was pretty in a calculated way, everything about her appearance designed for maximum effect with minimum effort. "Heard you caused quite a scene tonight," she said, signaling Sam for a martini. "News travels fast." "Honey, news about Damien Wolfe travels at light speed. Half the company's been waiting for someone to take him down a peg." She accepted her drink with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, though I'm not sure Charlotte appreciated the public humiliation. "Where is she now?" "Damage control, making calls, sending texts, trying to convince people that what they saw wasn't what they think they saw." Leah sipped her martini delicately. "It's not working." Sam had moved to the other end of the bar, but I knew he was listening. The man had selective hearing when it came to interesting conversations. "What do you know about Damien?" I asked. Leah's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "What don't I know? The man's a walking HR violation. 3 assistants have quit in the past year, all citing personal reasons. His wife hasn't been seen at a company function in months. And the rumors?" She trailed off, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "What rumors?" "Nothing concrete, just talk about late meetings, business trips that don't quite add up, the way he looks at certain employees." She finished her martini in one gulp. "Charlotte's not the first, if that's what you're wondering." The words hit me like a physical blow, not the first, meaning there had been others, meaning this was a pattern, not an aberration. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long have you known?" Leah's silence was answer enough. She'd known about Charlotte and Damien, probably for months. had watched me play the oblivious husband while my marriage disintegrated behind my back. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I wanted to tell you, but Charlotte made me promise. Get out. Elliot, get out." She left money on the bar and walked away without another word. I stared at my reflection in the mirror behind the bottles, seeing a stranger with tired eyes and clenched fists. "Feel better?" Sam asked, returning to my end of the bar. "Not really." "Good. Means you're not completely dead inside yet." He poured himself a drink, something top shelf that he probably saved for special occasions. "So what's the plan?" I thought about Charlotte's face when I'd confronted Damien. The embarrassment, the anger, the way she'd looked at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. 6 years of marriage, and she was more concerned about her boss's reputation than her husband's feelings. "I'm going to find out everything," I said. "Every detail, every lie, every moment of this whole mess. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with." "That's not revenge," Sam said. "That's justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" "We'll find out." I went home to an empty house. Charlotte's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she was either still doing damage control or she'd decided to spend the night somewhere else. The security cameras I'd installed were still recording, their red lights blinking like mechanical eyes in the darkness. The irony wasn't lost on me. I made coffee and fired up my laptop, falling back on skills I hadn't used since my newspaper days. Investigative journalism was like riding a bicycle. Once you learned how to dig up dirt, you never really forgot. Damien Wolfe's public profile was impressive. MBA from Wharton, successful track record at 3 different companies, married to Vanessa Wolfe, a former model who now ran some kind of charity foundation. They lived in a mansion in the hills, drove matching Tesla Model S sedans, and appeared in society pages with the kind of regularity that suggested a very good publicist. But public profiles were just the surface. The real information was always buried deeper. I started with social media, cross-referencing Damien's posts with Charlotte's, looking for patterns. Business trips that coincided, late-night likes on each other's photos, comments that seemed innocent until you read them with suspicion. Then I moved on to company records. Charlotte had left her laptop open, probably in her rush to leave for damage control. Her email was still logged in, and I felt only a moment's guilt before diving in. The first few months of emails were professional. Project updates, meeting schedules, the usual corporate communication. But around 6 months ago, the tone started changing. Subtle at first, a joke here, a personal comment there, then more obvious. "Thanks for staying late to help with the presentation. Couldn't have done it without you. D. Looking forward to our dinner meeting tomorrow. The restaurant you suggested sounds perfect. D. You looked incredible at the investor meeting. That dress was distracting. D. I found deleted drafts in her sent folder, responses she'd written but never sent. They were worse than anything she'd actually transmitted. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I know this is complicated, but what we have is worth the risk. I love the way you make me feel, like I'm someone worth wanting. The last one hit me like a punch to the gut, like she was someone worth wanting, as if 6 years of marriage, 6 years of me telling her she was beautiful and smart and perfect, meant nothing compared to a few months of attention from her boss. I printed everything. Emails, photos, text message screenshots that Charlotte had apparently sent to herself for safekeeping. By dawn, I had a stack of evidence that would make any divorce attorney salivate. But I wasn't thinking about divorce yet. I was thinking about consequences. Charlotte came home at 7 a.m., looking like she'd slept in her car. The red dress was wrinkled, her makeup smudged, her carefully arranged hair falling in defeated strands around her face. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes taking in the scattered printouts, the open laptop, the expression on my face that probably looked like winter in Moscow. You went through my email. You left it open. That doesn't give you the right. To what? To find out my wife is having an affair? To discover that half the office knows something I didn't? I slid one of the printed emails across the table. How long, Charlotte? She read her own words, her face going pale. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The only question is how long it's been going on. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, Mrs. Pike was walking her poodle again, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever domestic drama was unfolding behind our perfectly maintained facade. 4 months, Charlotte said finally. Maybe 5. Maybe? It started as nothing. Just conversation. He was going through problems with Vanessa. I was feeling distant from you. So this is my fault? That's not what I said. It's what you implied. I leaned back in my chair, studying this woman I'd thought I knew. Tell me about the business trips. What business trips? I slid another printout across the table. Hotel reservations, flight confirmations, all paid for by the company. All for trips that involved both Charlotte and Damien, often to cities that had nothing to do with their actual client base. San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, very thorough market research. I tapped the papers with my finger. Or very expensive dates. Charlotte's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing, the kind of crying that was supposed to make men feel guilty and protective. Instead, I felt nothing but cold calculation. I never meant for this to happen, she sobbed. It just developed. He makes me feel special. And I don't? You make me feel safe, comfortable, like furniture. The comparison stung because there was truth in it. I had gotten comfortable in our marriage, had stopped trying to impress her the way I had when we were dating. But comfort wasn't betrayal. Comfort wasn't 4 months of lying and sneaking around and making me look like a fool in front of 300 people. Pack a bag, I said. What? Pack a bag and get out. Stay with Leah, stay with your parents, stay with Damien for all I care, but you're not staying here. Elliot, please. I'll have the locks changed by this afternoon. If you need anything else, you can call my attorney. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're not serious. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I'd already called a locksmith, scheduled an appointment for noon. Then I'd called the bank and frozen our joint accounts. Finally, I'd sent an email to the best divorce attorney in the city, requesting a consultation. Dead serious. Charlotte tried pleading, tried reasoning, tried everything except taking responsibility for what she'd done. When none of that worked, she went upstairs and packed a bag with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face like she was the victim in this scenario. As she loaded her suitcase into her car, Mrs. Pike appeared at her fence with pruning shears, pretending to tend her roses while obviously eavesdropping. The whole neighborhood would know about our separation by lunchtime. This isn't over, Charlotte said, standing in our driveway like she was trying to memorize it. Yes, it is. She drove away without looking back. I watched from the window until her car disappeared around the corner. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and started planning my next move. Because Sam had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't interested in justice anymore. I wanted revenge. The locksmith was a chatty guy named Pete, who'd apparently handled his share of domestic situations. He changed all the locks without asking questions, then handed me a business card for a security company that specialized in domestic transition situations. Might want to think about cameras, he said, nodding toward Mrs. Pike, who was still pretending to garden while obviously listening to every word. Sometimes the angry spouse comes back with friends. I already had cameras, but I thanked him anyway. As his van pulled away, my phone started ringing. Charlotte, calling from what was probably Leah's apartment. I let it go to voicemail. Then I called Sam. How's the revolution going? He asked, instead of hello. Phase 1 complete. Need to talk to you about Phase 2. Sounds ominous. Come by the bar tonight. Bring your evidence. The Iron Oak was busier than usual for a Tuesday evening, filled with the kind of people who had stories they didn't want to tell at home. Sam had reserved the back booth, the one with a clear view of the entire bar and enough privacy for sensitive conversations. I spread the printed emails across the scarred wooden table like a poker hand. Sam read through them methodically, his cop instincts still sharp after all these years out of uniform. "This is good," he said finally. "Damning, actually. But what's your endgame here?" "I want them both to lose everything." "Define everything." I'd been thinking about that all day. Damien loses his job, his reputation, probably his marriage. Charlotte loses her job, her friends, her standing in the community. I want them to understand what consequences feel like. Sam leaned back in the booth, studying my face. "You sure about this? Once you start down this road, there's no going back." "I'm sure." "All right then." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I know someone in HR at Charlotte's company. Might be interested in these emails, especially the ones about business trips that look suspiciously like personal vacations." "What about Damien's wife?" "Vanessa? That's trickier. She's not exactly the type to air her dirty laundry in public." Sam paused, thinking. "But she's got connections, society pages, charity boards, the kind of people who can destroy a reputation with whispered conversations at the country club." We spent the next hour planning like generals preparing for war. Sam would reach out to his HR contact, someone named Richard, who'd apparently been looking for an excuse to investigate Damien for months. I would handle the more direct approach. "What kind of direct approach?" Sam asked. I smiled for the first time in days. "The kind that makes good television." Wednesday morning, I parked across the street from Charlotte's office building and waited. The parking garage was perfect for what I had in mind. Multiple levels, security cameras that probably didn't work, and enough ambient noise to cover the sound of metal on metal. Damien's Tesla was parked in his reserved spot on the executive level, gleaming black paint that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. I'd brought a set of keys from home, the kind with jagged edges that left very distinctive marks. The key slid along the driver's side door with a satisfying screech. I carved a message into the paint, taking my time to make sure each letter was clearly legible. "I'm Elliot, not your wife's +1. Then I left a note under his windshield wiper. "Mr. Wolfe, I believe we were interrupted last night before our conversation was finished. I'd like to discuss your management style at your earliest convenience. I'm sure we can reach an understanding that works for everyone involved. Respectfully, Elliot Grayson P.S. You might want to consider a different parking spot." I was back in my car across the street when Damien emerged from the building at lunchtime. Even from a distance, I could see his face turn red when he discovered my artwork. He looked around the garage like he expected to find me hiding behind a pillar, then pulled out his phone and started making angry calls. 20 minutes later, building security was reviewing camera footage. Unfortunately for them, I'd parked in the one blind spot on the executive level, a fact I'd discovered during my reconnaissance mission the day before. My phone rang as I was driving home. "This is Damien Wolfe. I think we need to talk." "I think you're right. Meet me at Starbucks on 5th Street in 1 hour." "I'll be there." The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for conversation. Damien was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall like he expected an ambush. He looked older in daylight, the kind of aging that came from stress and bad decisions. "You vandalized my car," he said without preamble. I expressed my feelings artistically. "This is harassment. This is consequences." I sat down across from him, noting the way his hands shook slightly when he lifted his coffee cup. "Something you're apparently not familiar with. What do you want?" "I want you to resign." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not going to happen." "Sure it is." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I've got recordings of our conversation at the gala, video of you putting your hands on my wife, copies of emails that would make any HR department very, very interested. The color drained from his face. You're bluffing. Am I? I scrolled through the photos on my phone, letting him see glimpses of printed emails, text message screenshots, hotel receipts. Want to bet your career on it? Damien stared at the phone like it was a loaded gun. What exactly are you proposing? Simple. You resign from your position, effective immediately. Cite personal reasons, family obligations, whatever corporate speak makes you feel better. In exchange, I don't send these materials to HR, the board of directors, or your wife. And Charlotte? Charlotte's not your problem anymore. He was quiet for a long time, probably running calculations in his head. The cost of fighting versus the cost of giving in. The likelihood that I was serious versus the hope that I was just an angry husband who'd calm down eventually. I need time to think, he said finally. You have until Friday. That's not enough time. It's plenty of time. I stood up, leaving my untouched coffee on the table. Oh, and Damien? If you try to retaliate against Charlotte or anyone else, I'll make sure every business publication in the city gets copies of these emails. Your reputation won't survive that kind of exposure. I walked away before he could respond, leaving him sitting in that corner booth with his expensive suit and his expensive problems. By Thursday afternoon, the gossip network was in full swing. Sam's HR contact had received an anonymous package containing copies of the most damaging emails. Vanessa Wolfe had been spotted having lunch with 3 of the city's most prominent society wives, the kind of women who could destroy a reputation faster than a Twitter mob. Charlotte called 17 times. I answered on the 18th. What did you do? She screamed into the phone. I protected myself. Damien's talking about resigning. They're launching an investigation. My job... Your job was over the minute you decided to sleep with your boss. You bastard. You vindictive, petty... I hung up. Friday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You win. Resignation letter submitted this morning. I hope you're satisfied. I wasn't satisfied. I was just getting started. The local business journal ran the story that afternoon. Tech CEO resigns amid personal scandal. They didn't have details, but they had enough unnamed sources to paint a picture of inappropriate workplace behavior and potential harassment issues. By evening, the story had been picked up by 3 other publications. Damien Wolfe's carefully crafted reputation was crumbling in real time, and I had a front-row seat to watch it happen. But the best part came Saturday morning, when Mrs. Pike knocked on my door with a casserole and the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. Heard about Charlotte, she said, not bothering to pretend she wasn't thrilled by the neighborhood drama. Such a shame when marriages don't work out. These things happen, I said, accepting the casserole because refusing it would have been rude. Oh, they certainly do, especially when people don't know how to behave themselves. She leaned in conspiratorially. I saw her with that man, weeks ago, in his car right there in your driveway. Thought you should know. Mrs. Pike had been sitting on that information for weeks, probably waiting for the right moment to deploy it. The woman was a strategic genius. I appreciate you telling me, I said. Well, we neighbors have to look out for each other. She patted my arm with genuine sympathy. You're better off without her, dear. Much better off. As she walked back to her house, I realized something had shifted in the neighborhood dynamic. I wasn't the cuckolded husband anymore. I was the wronged party who'd fought back and won. It felt better than I'd expected. Sunday morning brought another surprise. Leah Morrison, standing on my doorstep with red eyes and a hangover that probably violated several laws of physics. You destroyed her, she said without preamble. She destroyed herself. Charlotte's been fired. Did you know that? Terminated for violating company policy. She can't find another job because everyone thinks she's a homewrecker. Her parents won't even talk to her. And? And she's my best friend. Was, I corrected. Past tense, because friends don't help each other commit adultery. Leah's face crumpled like wet cardboard. I never meant for any of this to happen. But you knew it was happening. You knew, and you helped cover it up, and you watched me play the fool for months. I stepped closer, letting her see the anger I'd been keeping carefully controlled. You want to blame someone for Charlotte's situation? Look in the mirror. She left crying, which should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd planned, but I wasn't done yet. Monday brought news that Damien's resignation had created chaos at Charlotte's former company. Stock prices dropped 3% on rumors of internal scandal. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. 2 more executives submitted their resignations rather than face the inevitable investigation. I was reading about it online when someone started pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I could see Charlotte standing on my porch, looking like she'd been living in her car for a week. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who'd reached the end of their rope. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Let me in," she demanded. "No. This is my house too." "Not anymore. Check the divorce papers your attorney should have received by now." She tried to push against the door, but the chain held firm. "You can't do this to me, Elliot. I have nowhere else to go." "You should have thought of that before you decided to redecorate Damien's office with your underwear." Her face went from desperate to furious in the space of a heartbeat. "You self-righteous prick. You think you're so perfect, sitting in your little cave analyzing data while I was out there actually living. At least Damien made me feel alive. How's that working out for you now?" She started crying again, but these were angry tears, the kind that came with clenched fists and threats. "I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone what kind of man you really are. Vindictive, controlling. Go ahead. Tell them how your controlling husband caught you cheating and had the audacity to be upset about it. I'm sure you'll get lots of sympathy." I closed the door and walked away, leaving her screaming on the porch. Mrs. Pike appeared at her window within minutes, probably taking notes for her next neighborhood intelligence briefing. 20 minutes later, Charlotte's car was gone, but I knew she'd be back. Desperate people did desperate things, and Charlotte was definitely desperate. I called Sam. "Heard you had a visitor," he said. "News travels fast." "Mrs. Pike called me. Apparently Charlotte put on quite a show for the neighbors." Sam's voice carried a note of concern. "You might want to think about staying somewhere else for a few days. Angry ex-wives can be unpredictable. I'm not running from my own house. I'm not suggesting you run, I'm suggesting you be smart. Come stay at my place above the bar. Let things cool down." But I didn't want things to cool down. I wanted them to get hotter. That evening, I drove to the Iron Oak with a specific purpose in mind. The bar was crowded with the usual mix of blue-collar workers and white-collar refugees, people looking to drink away their problems or find new ones. Damien Wolfe was sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing what looked like his 4th or 5th whiskey. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and a polo shirt, but he still looked like what he was, a rich man slumming it with the common people. I took the stool next to him. "Fancy meeting you here," I said. He looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Come to gloat? Come to drink? Ooh, same as you." Sam appeared with a whiskey without being asked, then moved away to give us privacy. The man had excellent instincts. "You got what you wanted," Damien said after a long silence. "I resigned. My reputation's shot. Vanessa's filing for divorce." "Consequences," I said simply. "You destroyed my life. I exposed your choices. There's a difference." He laughed bitterly. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a bitter man who couldn't keep his wife satisfied." The words were designed to provoke, to start a fight that would give him some outlet for his rage. Instead, I smiled and pulled out my phone. "Say that again," I said, hitting the record button. His face went pale. "You're recording this?" "I'm documenting this, same way I documented everything else." I slid the phone closer to him. "Go ahead. Tell me more about how this is all my fault. Explain to everyone listening how a man is responsible when his wife decides to cheat." Damien stared at the phone like it was a snake. Around us, the bar's ambient noise seemed to fade as other patrons realized something interesting was happening. "Turn that off," he said. "Why? Afraid people might hear what you really think about marriage and fidelity and taking responsibility for your actions?" He reached for the phone, but I was faster, pulling it back before he could grab it. The sudden movement caused him to overbalance on his stool, and he had to grab the bar to keep from falling. The entire bar was watching now, sensing drama like sharks sensing blood. "You want to know what I think?" Damien said, his voice rising. "I think you're a pathetic loser who drove his wife into another man's arms. Charlotte came to me because you couldn't give her what she needed." And what was that? Excitement, adventure, a man who wasn't afraid to take what he wanted. I stopped recording and put the phone away. "Interesting theory. Let's test it." Before he could react, I stood up and addressed the entire bar. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Damien Wolfe, former CEO, current unemployed person, and the man who's been sleeping with my wife for the past 5 months." My voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. "He seems to think that adultery is the wronged spouse's fault. Anyone want to share their thoughts on that theory?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Catcalls, boos, and several creative suggestions about what Damien could do with his theory. Someone threw a peanut. Another patron started a slow clap. Damien's face went from pale to bright red. "You can't do this!" "I just did." He lunged at me then, probably figuring that violence was his only remaining option, but I'd been expecting it, and I stepped aside at the last second. His momentum carried him past me and into an empty table, which collapsed under his weight with a satisfying crash. Sam was there instantly, his ex-cop instincts kicking in. "That's enough, gentlemen. Damien, I think you should leave." "He assaulted me," Damien protested from the floor. "I saw him step aside when you tried to attack him," Sam said calmly. "Self-defense. Now get out of my bar before I call some friends who are still on the force." 2 regulars helped Damien to his feet and escorted him toward the door. As he passed me, he leaned in close enough to whisper, "This isn't over." "Yes," I said. "It is." After he left, the bar erupted in applause. Several people bought me drinks. A woman I'd never met told me I was better off without Charlotte. An old man with navy tattoos shared a story about his own cheating ex-wife and how he'd handled it. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But the feeling didn't last long. Tuesday morning brought a visit from 2 police officers responding to a complaint about harassment and stalking. Apparently, Charlotte had decided to play the victim card, claiming I was following her and making threatening phone calls. The officers were professional but thorough, asking questions about my whereabouts and activities over the past week. I showed them the divorce papers, the evidence of Charlotte's affair, and the security camera footage from my own house, proving I'd been home during the times she claimed I was stalking her. "Sounds like a domestic situation that got out of hand," the older officer said after reviewing everything. "But ma'am, filing false police reports is a crime. You might want to think carefully before making any more accusations you can't prove." Charlotte, who'd been sitting in their patrol car, looked like she wanted to disappear. The officers left without filing charges, but not before warning both of us to stay away from each other. As soon as they were gone, my phone started ringing. "You called the cops on me?" Charlotte screamed. "You called the cops on me. They just didn't believe your story. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to tell everyone." "Tell them what? That you're a cheating liar who got caught? Go ahead. See how much sympathy you get." She hung up, but I knew this wasn't the end. Desperate people escalated, and Charlotte was definitely desperate. That afternoon, I came home to find my front door standing open. The house had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, cushions overturned, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had been searching for something specific, but I couldn't tell what. Then I realized what was missing: my laptop, the one with all the evidence I'd collected about Charlotte and Damien's affair. I called the police, but I already knew they wouldn't find anything useful. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Charlotte still had keys to the old locks, and she knew the security system code. While I was giving my statement to the officers, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Now we're even. But we weren't even. Not by a long shot. Because Charlotte had made one crucial mistake. She'd taken the laptop, but she hadn't thought to check the cloud backup. Every email, every photo, every piece of evidence was safely stored online, accessible from any computer. More importantly, she'd just committed breaking and entering, and I had security cameras to prove it. I spent Wednesday morning at the police station, filing charges and providing video evidence of Charlotte's break-in. The desk sergeant was the same officer who'd responded to her harassment complaint, and he wasn't happy about being played. "Some people never learn," he said, watching the security footage of Charlotte entering my house with a key that no longer worked, then kicking in the back door when the front door locks had been changed. "What happens now?" "Now we issue a warrant for her arrest. Breaking and entering, theft, filing a false police report. She's looking at some serious charges." By Thursday, Charlotte was in custody. The local newspaper ran a small item about the arrest, identifying her as a former employee of the tech company currently under investigation for workplace harassment. Her parents finally returned my calls. "We're very sorry about all this," Charlotte's mother said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "We had no idea things had gotten so out of hand." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Davidson. We've hired an attorney for Charlotte, but we want you to know that we don't approve of her behavior. What she did to you, to your marriage, it's inexcusable." The conversation was awkward, but necessary. Charlotte's parents were good people who'd raised a daughter who'd made terrible choices. They deserved to know that I didn't hold them responsible for Charlotte's actions. But I wasn't feeling generous toward everyone. Friday brought the news I'd been waiting for. Leah Morrison had been terminated from her job at a marketing firm after HR discovered she'd been using company resources to help Charlotte cover up her affair. Apparently, she'd been making personal calls on company time, using the office printer to create fake documents, and even charging personal expenses to her corporate credit card. The termination letter, which somehow found its way to my email inbox, cited gross misconduct and violation of company ethics policies. I forwarded it to Sam with a simple message: consequences. His response was equally simple: justice served. But I still wasn't done. Saturday evening, I drove to the hotel where Charlotte and Damien had conducted most of their affair. The same hotel where they'd charged expensive dinners and weekend getaways to the company credit card. I wasn't there for revenge this time. I was there for closure. The bar was elegant and expensive, the kind of place where adultery came with cloth napkins and wine lists. I ordered a whiskey and sat in the corner booth where Charlotte and Damien had probably planned their next move while I was home analyzing data and wondering why my wife seemed so distant. Rough week? I looked up to see Vanessa Wolfe standing beside my table. Damien's soon-to-be ex-wife was even more beautiful in person than in the society page photos. Tall, blonde, with the kind of poise that came from years of practice at charity galas and country club events. "You could say that," I replied. "Mind if I join you?" She sat down without waiting for an answer, signaling the waitress for a martini with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being served. "I wanted to thank you," she said once her drink arrived. "For what?" "For giving me the excuse I needed to finally leave my husband." She sipped her martini delicately. "I've known about his affairs for years. This wasn't his first, and it wouldn't have been his last. But it was the first time someone fought back. I'm sorry about your marriage." She laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. Don't be. I'm getting half of everything, plus alimony, plus a very generous settlement to keep quiet about his business practices. Your wife wasn't the only employee he was harassing. The implications of that statement hung between us like smoke. How many others? I asked. Does it matter? What matters is that it's over now. He'll never work in this industry again, and I'll never have to pretend I don't know what kind of man I married. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd been betrayed by the same man, finding an odd sort of peace in each other's company. What will you do now? Vanessa asked eventually. I'm not sure yet. Start over, I suppose. Good for you. She finished her martini and stood to leave. For what it's worth, I think you handled this perfectly. Sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to hit them where it hurts. After she left, I sat in that hotel bar for another hour, thinking about consequences and choices and the price of betrayal. Charlotte and Damien had thought they were smarter than everyone else, that they could take what they wanted without paying for it. They'd been wrong. But I still had one more move to make. The invitation arrived on Monday morning, hand-delivered by a courier who waited while I read it. Heavy cardstock, elegant script, the kind of formal presentation that screamed money and importance. You are cordially invited to attend a private gathering to address recent events affecting our professional and personal communities. Your presence is requested at the Grandview Hotel rooftop garden, Saturday evening at 8 o'clock. Dress code, business formal. Sincerely, the concerned parties. I looked up at the courier, a young woman who was obviously trying not to smile. Who sent this? I'm not at liberty to say, sir, but I was told to mention that several mutual acquaintances will be in attendance, and that the evening promises to be illuminating. After she left, I called Sam. Please tell me you didn't organize some kind of confrontation, I said. Define confrontation. Sam. Relax, it's not what you think, but you should definitely be there, and bring copies of everything. Everything. Trust me. Saturday evening found me standing in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting my tie and wondering what exactly I was walking into. The Grandview Hotel was the kind of place where corporate mergers were planned and political careers were ended. Its rooftop garden offered a panoramic view of the city, along with enough privacy for sensitive conversations. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. The rooftop was decorated with string lights and elegant furniture, creating an atmosphere that was part garden party, part tribunal. About 30 people were scattered around the space, and I recognized most of them. Colleagues from Charlotte's former company, executives from competing firms, several prominent members of the local business community. And there, standing near the bar with drinks in their hands and expressions of barely contained panic on their faces, were Charlotte and Damien. Elliot! Mrs. Pike appeared at my elbow, wearing what looked like her finest church dress and a smile that could have powered the city grid. Isn't this exciting? Just like one of those murder mystery dinners, except nobody's dead. Mrs. Pike, what are you doing here? Oh, I was invited, dear. Apparently my testimony is considered valuable. She leaned in conspiratorially. I've been keeping very detailed notes about the comings and goings in our neighborhood. Very detailed. Before I could process that information, Sam appeared with a whiskey and a grim smile. Welcome to the reckoning, he said. What is this, Sam? This is what happens when you mess with the wrong people. He nodded toward a group of well-dressed women near the windows. Vanessa Wolfe has some very influential friends. Turns out they don't appreciate men who abuse their power to prey on employees. As if summoned by her name, Vanessa Wolfe glided over to us. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my car, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Elliot, so glad you could make it. She air-kissed my cheek like we were old friends. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of inviting a few people who might be interested in hearing the full story of what happened at Damien's company. What kind of people? Reporters, HR executives, board members from several major corporations. Her smile widened. Oh, and the district attorney's office. They're very interested in the misuse of company funds for personal expenses. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just social humiliation. This was a coordinated takedown. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice called out over the ambient conversation. A woman I didn't recognize was standing near the center of the rooftop, tapping a champagne glass with a knife. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd gathered around her like moths to a flame. Charlotte and Damien tried to edge toward the exit, but found their way blocked by several large men who looked like they moonlighted as security consultants. My name is Margaret Chen, the woman continued, and I represent the law firm of Chen, Williams & Associates. We specialize in corporate malfeasance and employment law violations. Charlotte's face had gone white. Damien looked like he was going to be sick. Over the past several weeks, we've been investigating allegations of sexual harassment, misuse of corporate funds, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders at Pinnacle Technologies. Tonight, we're here to present our findings to the relevant parties and the press. A man with a camera stepped forward, and I realized this was being recorded. Whatever happened next would be preserved for posterity. Mr. Wolfe, Margaret Chen continued, would you care to explain why company credit cards were used to pay for hotel rooms, dinners, and weekend getaways that had nothing to do with legitimate business purposes? Damien tried to speak, but only managed a strangled croak. Ms. Grayson, the attorney turned to Charlotte, would you like to comment on your role in these activities? Specifically, your use of company resources to facilitate an extramarital affair with your supervisor? Charlotte found her voice. This is harassment. You can't do this. Actually, we can, Margaret Chen replied calmly. This is a private event, and everyone here has been fully briefed on the legal implications of their attendance. You're free to leave at any time, but I should mention that doing so might be considered an admission of guilt. Guilt of what? Damien finally managed to ask. Fraud, embezzlement, sexual harassment, creating a hostile work environment, conspiracy to defraud shareholders. Should I continue? The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. I spotted 3 people taking notes, probably reporters. The man with the camera was recording everything. We have documentation, the attorney continued, producing a thick folder, of every inappropriate expense, every misused company resource, every violation of corporate policy. We have witness statements, email evidence, and testimony from multiple sources. She opened the folder and began reading. Hotel bills, restaurant charges, airline tickets to cities that had nothing to do with company business. The evidence I'd collected was there, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. Furthermore, Margaret Chen continued, we have evidence that Mr. Wolfe engaged in similar behavior with at least 3 other female employees over the past 2 years. This represents a pattern of predatory behavior that the company's board of directors failed to address. Several board members in the crowd looked like they wanted to disappear. Ms. Grayson's role in these activities goes beyond simple adultery. She actively participated in the misuse of company funds, helped create false documentation to cover up the affair, and conspired to deceive both the company and her husband about the nature of her relationship with Mr. Wolfe. Charlotte tried to interrupt, but the attorney held up a hand. I'm not finished. We also have evidence that Ms. Grayson enlisted the help of at least one co-worker, Ms. Leah Morrison, in covering up the affair. Ms. Morrison used company resources to create false alibis, made personal calls on company time, and charged personal expenses to her corporate credit card. The dominoes were falling faster now. I could see the calculation in people's eyes. Who was connected to whom? Whose reputation would survive? Who would be throwing whom under the bus before the night was over? The financial cost to Pinnacle Technologies exceeds $50,000 in misappropriated funds, the attorney continued. The reputational damage is incalculable. the legal liability is substantial. She closed the folder and looked directly at Charlotte and Damien. You have two choices. You can cooperate with our investigation, make full restitution, and accept the consequences of your actions. Or you can fight this in court, where everything we've discussed tonight will become public record. The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Finally, Damien spoke. What kind of cooperation are you talking about? Full disclosure, complete financial accounting, testimony against any co-conspirators, and public acknowledgement of your actions. Public acknowledgement? Margaret Chen smiled. A press conference, tomorrow morning, where you explain exactly what you did, how you did it, and why the shareholders and employees of Pinnacle Technologies deserved better. Charlotte finally found her voice. And if we don't, then we'll see you in court, along with the IRS, the SEC, and the District Attorney's Office. The attorney's smile widened. I should mention that we've already filed preliminary reports with all three agencies. The crowd began to murmur, sensing that the evening's entertainment was reaching its climax. I spotted Mrs. Pike taking notes in a small notebook, probably updating her intelligence files. I need to think about this, Damien said. You have until tomorrow morning, Margaret Chen replied. 9 a.m. sharp. The press conference is scheduled for 10, with or without your cooperation. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached me with congratulations, business cards, and invitations to lunch. Several reporters asked for interviews. A woman from the district attorney's office wanted to discuss my evidence collection methods. But the moment I'd been waiting for came when Charlotte approached me near the elevator. Are you satisfied now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you? You've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my future. Was it worth it? I looked at this woman I'd once loved, seeing clearly for the first time in years. The selfishness, the entitlement, the complete inability to take responsibility for her own choices. You destroyed everything, I said quietly. I just made sure everyone knew about it. I loved you, she whispered. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of me, the safety, the stability, the cover story that let you pretend to be someone you're not. I stepped into the elevator, holding the door open for a moment. But you never loved me enough to be faithful, and that's the difference between us. The doors closed on her stricken face. Sunday morning's newspapers carried the story on the front page of the business section. Corporate scandal rocks local tech company. The article detailed the misuse of company funds, the pattern of harassment, and the coordinated cover-up that had enabled it all. Charlotte and Damien held their press conference as scheduled. They looked like prisoners at their own execution, reading prepared statements that accepted responsibility while trying to minimize their culpability. The reporters weren't buying it. By Monday, 3 more companies had launched internal investigations into their own executives' expense accounts. The SEC announced a formal inquiry into Pinnacle Technologies' financial practices. The district attorney's office confirmed they were considering criminal charges. Tuesday brought the news that Charlotte had been arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement. Damien was arrested the same day on similar charges, plus sexual harassment and creating a hostile work environment. Leah Morrison was arrested Wednesday morning at her new apartment, charged with conspiracy and accessory after the fact. Thursday's newspaper carried an editorial about corporate accountability and the importance of whistleblowers in exposing corruption. I was mentioned by name as a private citizen whose investigation helped uncover a pattern of abuse that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. Friday evening, I was back at the Iron Oak, celebrating with Sam and a bar full of people who'd followed the story like a soap opera. Mrs. Pike was holding court near the dartboard, regaling anyone who'd listen with tales of her surveillance activities. To consequences, Sam said, raising his glass. To justice, I replied. We drank, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. 6 months later, Charlotte and Damien were both convicted on multiple charges. Charlotte received 2 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution. Damien got 5 years and a much larger restitution order. Leah Morrison pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation, but her career in marketing was over. Vanessa Wolfe used her divorce settlement to start a foundation supporting victims of workplace harassment. She invited me to the launch party, where she thanked me publicly for having the courage to fight back when others wouldn't. Mrs. Pike was featured in a magazine article about neighborhood watch programs. She became something of a local celebrity, consulting with other communities about surveillance techniques and information gathering. Sam's Bar became famous as the place where justice was served along with drinks. Business tripled, and he had to hire additional staff to handle the crowds. As for me, I started a new career as a forensic data analyst, helping attorneys and investigators uncover corporate fraud. Turns out there was a market for someone who knew how to dig up buried secrets and present them in court. I never remarried, but I dated occasionally. Women who appreciated honesty, who understood that trust was something to be earned and maintained, not taken for granted. I kept the house with its security cameras and perfect facade, but I changed the locks again, just because I could. And sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd stand at my bedroom window and look out at the neighborhood where it all began. Mrs. Pike's house, where vigilance never slept. The street where Charlotte had conducted her affair in plain sight. The driveway where Damien had thought he could park his expensive car and expensive problems without consequences. I'd learned something important during those months of investigation and revenge. The truth always comes out eventually. The only question is whether you're the one telling it or the one trying to hide from it. Charlotte and Damien had chosen to hide. I'd chosen to tell, and in the end, that made all the difference.